Going. So welcome everyone. This is our continuing class on the 6 perfections. Tonight we're going to go on to the 4th perfection, the perfection of joyous effort. But before we get started, we need to pull up the prayers, which I need screen sharing, co-hosting to be able to do that. I thought I had it earlier. Maybe I didn't. No, it'll come up in a second. So anyway, I hope everyone had a nice Thanksgiving holiday. Let's go. Not quite there yet. I'm still not able to share. I think that's it. That did the trick. Thank you, John. Let me pull up the prayers here. Great. And we'll begin with reciting the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha 3 times. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. And the short mandala offering. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then refuge in bodhicitta, first time in English, and then twice in Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye Chodong Soki Choknam La Jangchu Bardu Dakni Kyabsu Chi Daki Chunyan Gipe Sonam Gi Dola Panchir Sangye Drupar Shok Sangye Chodang Soki Choknam La Jangchu Bardu Dakni Kyabsu Chi Daki Chunyan Gipe Sonam Gi Dola Panchir Sangye Drupar Shok. Okay, let's do a short meditation, spending the first few minutes just focusing on the breath. As best as you can, keep your awareness with the breath, using the breath in whatever way you prefer. And then whenever the mind wanders, just guide the mind back to the breath. After a few minutes in silence, I'll lead you in a short reflection to set our bodhicitta motivation for tonight's class. So now let's set our motivation of bodhicitta. And let's do this tonight by reflecting a little on Buddha nature. This topic will actually come up in tonight's lecture. But recall that Buddha nature is referring to the fundamental purity and clarity of our own minds. With an understanding of Buddha nature, this motivation of bodhicitta makes complete sense. In fact, it is rooted then in this direct understanding of what the nature of our minds is. So let's take a moment to reflect on the idea of Buddha nature. We often use the analogy of a glass of water. Water, by its very nature, is pure and clear. But we know that at times, water becomes obscured. If we were to take dirt and to put it into the water, mix it around, the water would no longer be clear, would be opaque, wouldn't have that fundamental purity because it's polluted by the dirt. At least that purity wouldn't be manifesting in the way that it is before putting the dirt in. But that fundamental purity is actually still there. Under the surface, the clarity is still there. We just have to go through the process of removing the dirt, and then it will return, become manifest. Well, our minds are the same. Our minds are fundamentally pure and clear. Currently, though, they're polluted, contaminated with all the delusions, especially the anger that we looked at the last time when we met, discussed the antidote of patience, but also all the other deluded states of mind, our attachment and miserliness, our jealousy, our pride, our ignorance. All of these are in the mind adventitiously. They're only there because we haven't created the causes to remove them. If we do remove them, then once more that fundamental clarity and purity returns, becomes manifest once again. So this is what our minds are like, and not just our own minds, the minds of all beings. So when we set the motivation of bodhicitta, we have the intention to help all beings to purify their minds, to remove all of these negative tendencies. But we also have the motivation for ourselves to do that, to remove what obscures our minds currently, so we then can manifest our Buddha nature, that fundamental purity of the mind, advancing to its greatest degree. And in that state of perfect clarity and knowledge, compassion, we then can benefit all beings. So again, this mind of bodhicitta is rooted in this fact, this understanding that we and all beings have Buddha nature, have the ability to eventually develop our minds to that degree. So hold that motivation very strongly for tonight, rooted in this understanding of Buddha nature, with the confidence that you can achieve this. Purify your own mind so you can help others to do the same. Okay, again, it's good to see you all. And we're going to go on tonight to the fourth perfection, the perfection of joyous effort. This is kind of an interesting one. You know, what I've mentioned before, and I can go ahead and put this up on the screen, all of the 6 perfections that we're working with in this course, that these 6 perfections are set out in terms of increasing difficulty. So we began with looking at generosity at the beginning of November, which is a relatively easy thing to engage in, at least in its very minor ways, developing the mind that wants to give, and then the beginnings of our material generosity and other ways that we might give to others, protecting them, and so on. Then we look at the more difficult practice of having those pure ethics that are about abandoning all of our misdeeds, adopting all the virtuous behavior, and even adopting patterns of benefiting other beings, which is the Bodhisattva ethic, the idea that we don't want to not address the suffering that we see in the world around us. We want to be active agents in helping others to be free from that. Then last time we went on to patience, which we can see the advanced level of difficulty with regard to that. It does take a lot to practice patience and perfect it. We all have some measure of patience at times in certain situations, but to be able to have that all the time, even to the degree where we would only have compassion for someone who is harming us, that's pretty outrageous. But the fourth one you might look at and go, well, it doesn't seem that much more difficult than patience. I mean, patience is pretty tall order. Well, what do we mean by this joyous effort, and why is it so difficult to practice? And so what I want to start off with, of course, is looking at kind of the nature of this and what it is that we are kind of working with in terms of this perfection. So we have a clear understanding of it. So tonight we'll start, as we've been starting, with some form of a definition. And here I'll start with a few quotes from Shanti Deva, as well as Lama Zopa Rinpoche commenting on that. That gives us a better understanding of what is really meant by this fourth perfection. And then the types of joyous effort. We'll look at the three hindrances to joyous effort, which are all included under the category of laziness. Just three different types of laziness, three ways that a lazy attitude manifests. And then the fourth topic, the four forces for developing favorable conditions for joyous effort. These are important to know because this really gives us the tools that we have to work with in order to enhance our enthusiasm and perseverance in regard to our spiritual path. And then finally, we'll, as we have been doing, look at ways to practice this perfection. And tonight, what I'll be doing for that is mostly sharing some advice from Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe. But this word joyous effort, by the way, or this term joyous effort, sometimes is translated as perseverance or enthusiasm or enthusiastic perseverance, sometimes even diligence. I don't know. Joyous effort works quite well, though, because it shows that there is an effortful aspect to it, but it's also joyous. It also has a very light quality to it. So again, in the book by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, there's a quote from chapter 7 of Shanti Deva's text, which is all on joyous effort. And it starts off with verse 1 and then goes to the first lines of verse 2. One who practices patience in the above way, what we just talked about, and of course this is following chapter 6 of Shanti Deva's text, which is all about patience, should develop fortitude. So if you practice patience, you need to go on then to develop what is being called here fortitude, which I don't really hear of so much as a translation term for joyous effort. And I don't know that Rinpoche uses it that much, but anyway, I guess it's what they chose for this book in terms of translating joyous effort. And for awakening depends on fortitude, Shanti Deva says, because without fortitude, there is no merit, as there is no movement without wind. The wind element is what causes movement of things. And so without wind, you could never have movement. Without fortitude, you could never have merit. You could never have the engagement in all of the meritorious acts that we have to undertake in order to achieve enlightenment. Then he goes on in the very next verse to say, what is fortitude? It is persevering effort in the cultivation of virtue. And so this is what we are meaning by this term. It's not a worldly effort. As we're going to see, having worldly effort for things, we do need that in order to achieve our worldly accomplishments, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about an effort that is directed towards virtue, towards engaging in those actions that will help ripen our own minds and help to ripen the minds of other beings, engaging in the six perfections and so on, all the practices that we do on the spiritual path. So let's get a little more, not quite technical definition, but first, we do have a few more quotes from Lama Zopa here. At present, he says, we attempt to find happiness in mundane pleasure. And because of that, we are always disappointed. Moreover, in our attempt, we create non-virtue. So here, Shanti Deva showed us that happiness is the complete opposite of this, that happiness lies in creating virtue. So when Shanti Deva is spelling out, what do we mean by this joyous effort? We mean the the effort we put into our spiritual practice and engaging in virtue that will bring about the cause of or the result of happiness that acts as the cause for that. When we see this, we will naturally want to do virtuous things and we will find joy in doing them. When that happens, we will have boundless energy to do more virtuous things. This is enthusiastic or joyous perseverance. So this is kind of, again, what we are looking at is not the energy that we have for worldly affairs that only lead us down the path of suffering, but the energy that we need to have for spiritual practice, for virtue, that will lead us to the path, on the path to happiness. If we really get that fundamental point, that what this joyous enthusiasm is about is generating the energy behind our practice of attaining happiness. If we put it in those terms rather than practicing virtue, that really we're talking about attaining happiness, happiness for ourselves, and of course happiness for all beings, because we have bodhicitta motivation and we want to use our spiritual path to achieve our own happiness and the welfare of all beings. So if we put it in those terms, we see that it's a very clear choice. I'm either going to put enthusiasm and effort into what leads to happiness, or I'm going to continue to put enthusiasm in what leads only to suffering. And what leads to suffering, of course, is our attachment to worldly affairs, our attachment to worldly pleasures, our continuing to perpetuate all the causes that got us in this predicament in the first place, that are really behind our continual stay in psychic existence. So if we see it through that lens, that this is really about how do we achieve happiness by taking delight in virtue, which is the cause of happiness. So here we go into the more kind of definition sort of thing that Geshe Loden sets out that I've been sharing on each of these perfections. He says joyous effort is a mental factor. And it's one of the 11 virtuous mental factors, those of you who've studied minds and mental factors. And it takes delight in objects of virtue. That's why it has that joyous component to it, is that we are delighted to engage in virtue. It's not drudgery. We go, oh my gosh, I've got to do this again. I have to do my practice again. It's joyous about all of what we have to engage in. When conjoined with a bodhicitta motivation, he says, joyous effort becomes a perfection of joyous effort. This is true for all of the perfections. You can practice a joyous effort with regard to some measure of spiritual practice, but it doesn't necessarily become the perfection of joyous effort until you have it conjoined with the mind that aspires to become a Buddha for the sake of all beings, our bodhicitta. So with each of these, I've also been sharing how these are perfected in our own minds in terms of the mental state that we have. And of course, this one being this mental factor, it's very obvious that this is something we develop internally. And here, Shanti Deva, in the beginning of chapter 5, where he sets out how each of the 6 perfections are culminated in our own minds, he uses this first verse. It says, the result of generating a clear mind is Brahma and so forth. Meaning that if you do have a clear mind and generate this strong motivation for your practice, you will attain the Brahma abodes and all these various other attainments of the spiritual path. Results of inferior practice endowed with body and speech are not like that. So if we have an inferior practice that doesn't have this clear focus and energy and enthusiasm, we aren't going to get the same sort of results. So we need a very superior practice, one that is going to be generated from this mind of joyous effort. Let's go on then to look at the types of joyous effort. And I might just point out that, again, as usual, I have prepared a handout that I did when I led this course previously that you will be getting. I'll forward it on to John so he can get it to Sarah and so on. This is the handout that you'll get. It's everything that's on this in the first few pages, at least, I'm going to be going through on the screen. So I won't be toggling back and forth between these. After those 3 types, we go on then, as I said in the earlier outline, the 3 hindrances to joyous effort. We'll talk about them and talk about the remedies to those so we know how to combat them. And then we go on to the 4 forces, these 4 forces that help us to develop our joyous enthusiasm. And I might point out that at the tail end of this, the fourth page, are once more these ways to practice it for the best and purest results. And I'm not going to touch on so much. I've been giving them to you for each of these, and you can read them through and know how to practice them. But they are about how we elevate our practice of joyous effort through these supreme qualities and through our practicing the other perfections within them. So within joyous effort, we can practice generosity, morality, and so on. And that even goes on to a sixth or fifth page where we have the conclusion. So I just wanted to point that out, that these will, again, other than that last bit, I'll be putting all of these on the screen. So let's go through the three types. The first one is called armor-like joyous effort. It's kind of interesting. I always find it interesting that in so many of the Buddhist texts, they use military examples of like wearing an armor into battle. And so it's, again, shows that at the time of the Buddha, there were all of these same things that we're plagued by in our world of war, battle, discontent between various groups that manifested in that. The idea behind armor-like joyous effort, in short, is that we need to armor ourselves so that we don't succumb to the hindrances, to have this determination right from the beginning of our practice. That will be very important. We also have to have that joyous effort that is about gathering virtue, that really takes delight in doing all that we can to engage in virtuous practices. And then the third one is kind of a parallel to the third type of ethics that we saw a few classes back, and that is the joyous effort of acting for the welfare of others, to benefit others, and especially the 11 types of beings in terms of the types of suffering that we see in our world that do require us to enthusiastically go about helping beings. So let's look at them in more detail. These are, again, from that handout that you'll be getting, as well as you'll, of course, get the copy of the slides, the presentation slides that I'm showing you. So armor-like joyous effort refers to the armor of a preliminary enthusiastic thought that bodhisattvas put on prior to engaging themselves in any activity. And this is like an example of the sorts of thoughts that feed into that. For 1,000,000,000,000 sets of 3 immeasurably great eons, each composed of days as long as 1,000 great eons, I shall not relinquish my practice of joyous effort. In other words, for an incredibly long time, I'm going to be enthusiastic about my practice. For the sake of relieving the suffering of a single living being, I would happily remain in the hells until I attain Buddhahood. As I exert myself in this manner for the sake of complete enlightenment for all beings, what need is there to mention my joyfully persevering over a shorter period or in the face of lesser suffering? So if we really set the bar very high in terms of what we would have to endure in order to attain enlightenment for the benefit of other beings, then what we inevitably have to face is really minor in regard to or in comparison to what that is. If we say, I will abide in the hell realms, the worst hell realm that there is, the hell of unrelenting torment, Vici, it's often called, abide in that state for as long as it takes to alleviate the suffering of one being. Well, it's a pretty courageous and enthusiastic mind that is determined to do whatever it takes to benefit others. Well, then if we're doing it for all beings, and we don't even have to engage in that much suffering generally. I mean, look at this path that we're on in this life. It does take great effort, without a doubt. But we're not talking about that level of suffering, but we have to have that kind of set the bar way up here that we would do it at that level for beings, and even just one single being. Sorry, didn't have time to turn off my microphone. So let's go ahead and go back to the slides. There's a continuation of this with some comments by Lama Zopa about this first type, this armor-like joyous effort. Perseverance means keeping at it despite the hardships. Guru Shakyamuni Buddha collected merit for 3 countless great eons before he attained Buddhahood. Enlightenment. Same thing. Sacrificing himself for other sentient beings by giving away his limbs. Sorry, another sneeze. They often come in pairs. By giving away his limbs, his eyes, and even his entire body. Of course, we can recall the story where the Buddha, as the Bodhisattva prince, gave his body to the tigress who was starving, as well as her cubs that she'd just given birth to. They would all have died had the Buddha in that incarnation not given his body to the tigress. So again, this is the Buddha has shown that he had that determination, keeping at it in spite of whatever was required, whatever hardship. For 3 countless great eons, he practiced morality and lived in the pratimoksha and bodhisattva vows, purely practicing patience and perseverance and undergoing great hardships in order to become enlightened and benefit sentient beings such as ourselves. As it says in the Guru Puja, the perfection of perseverance means willingly remaining for countless eons in the hottest hell for even one sentient being. This is how the Buddha practiced, without discouragement or depression, but with great joy. So this is the verse from the Lama Chopa. Even if I must remain for an ocean of eons in the fiery hells of Avicii, for the sake of even just one sentient being, I seek your blessings to complete the perfection of enthusiasm that out of compassion untiringly strives for complete enlightenment. Again, it's a pretty tall order. I'm not saying that, again, we hopefully are gaining an appreciation of why this is more difficult than patience, why it's, in this order, and therefore something that requires us to engage in continually and meditate on and reflect upon. And that's where, towards the end, when we look at these 4 powers or forces, we can see what will contribute to us having that level of mind. But anything we gain from looking at this topic feeds into that and helps us to move further and further to where we become more and more enthusiastic about our practice, more and more joyful at our practice of the Dharma. So let's go on to the second one, the joyous effort of gathering virtue. This means applying yourself to the practice of the 6 perfections in order to accomplish them properly. Doing these virtuous activities with delight and without hesitation is the practice of the joyous effort of gathering virtue. So again, sometimes we are, I don't know, kind of dragged kicking and screaming into practices and doing things. We have to have that enthusiasm that looks at this and says, I want to gather this virtue on behalf of all sentient beings as well as myself. Bodhicitta very much influences all of these because they are practices of a bodhisattva, they're perfections. So we have to remember that what we are doing this for is for our own happiness, but moreover, the happiness of all beings. Why we want to engage in these 6 perfections, why we want to develop our own mind so we can benefit others. The second type of perseverance, Rinpoche says, is the perseverance of gathering virtue, which means finding joy in practicing the Dharma. As is said in the Compendium of the Perfections, if you have great perseverance, completely free from discouragement, there is nothing that you cannot accomplish or attain. If we are able to just really devote ourselves to the practice of engaging in virtue, we will attain the state of enlightenment without a doubt. Put the causes in place, the result will follow without a doubt. When we have perseverance to practice the Dharma, Rinpoche says, our life, whether long or short, becomes highly meaningful. How quickly we attain enlightenment depends on how much perseverance we have, how much joyous effort we muster up to put into our practice. Why? Because perseverance is the quality that keeps us from the distractions of worldly affairs, from laziness and from sleep. All of these things that we're going to talk about that are part of the hindrances. If we are able to put strong effort into our practice, we don't succumb to those. And, we might have times when we falter, but we always keep moving in that generally upward direction rather than plateauing or falling down and, becoming very lazy and subsumed by that. He then quotes the Sagaramati requested sutra, which says the lazy person has no generosity and so forth up to wisdom, has no practice of these 6 perfections. The lazy person cannot benefit others. The lazy person is far from enlightenment. So we're going to talk about laziness shortly. That's the next topic, the hindrances, the 3 types of laziness. But this is pointing out that if you are that type of person, you're not going to be able to benefit others. You're not going to be able to move on the path because you have to engage in virtuous practice in order to do that. The third of these 3 types of joyous effort is acting for the welfare of others. This is properly applying yourself to the practice of the 11 activities for others' welfare, which are the same 11 ways of helping others taught in the context of the perfection of ethics. So as I said earlier, when we went through the perfection of ethics, there are delineated these 11 categories, and I don't think I spent so much time on them then, and I won't spend as much time on them tonight, but I'll at least put them up on the screen. But essentially, it means any being who is in a state where they require help and assistance, and we have the ability to do that, we should be eager to do that. We should be joyful at hearing the words, "I need help." Instead, I think in our culture, we always have mistrust of that person, and we always back away and think, "Oh, I can't help you right now. I'm in a hurry. I'm doing all these other things," or whatever. But for the bodhisattva who's really practicing joyous effort, when they hear those words, it's like hearing the most wonderful thing in the world. People that need help, that want them to benefit them in some way. So when we're asked to do something for somebody, we're joyfully responding to it with a resounding yes and saying, "Yes, I'm happy to help you with that," as best as we can. Admittedly, we might have some inability to help in some situations, and we have to be mindful of that. And if we're not ready yet to give or to do something at a certain level that we are being asked to do, then we can say no at those times. But we see here it's helping those who suffer, who are ignorant of the methods, the Dharma methods for attaining happiness and so on, benefiting those in need of help, protecting those in danger, helping those afflicted with misery, those who are grieving and so on, helping the poverty-stricken, those who lack resources, as well as lack spiritual resources, helping the homeless, helping others according to their wishes, helping those on the right path and those on the wrong path. So those are on the right path, we want to help them by furthering their development on the right path. Those who are on the wrong path, help them to find the right path if we can do that, again, skillfully. Helping others using miracles, which, as I mentioned when we went through the perfection of ethics, this is when you acquire certain abilities due to the force of your concentrative effort, developing deep concentrations where you attain ability to manifest in various ways to benefit others and what have you. If you have miraculous powers, then you have to use those to benefit others. Of course, if we don't have them yet, we don't have to worry about that one yet. So Bodhisattvas works, this is now Rinpoche on this third one. Bodhisattvas work solely for the welfare of others and find incredible joy in doing so. This is the third kind of perseverance. No matter how long it takes and no matter how little progress we seem to make in helping others, we should never become discouraged. In fact, there is a little story, I might tell this just as an interlude here, of Shariputra, who you've heard of. Shariputra and Madhgalyayana are the 2 figures that are often to the side of the Buddha. There's the Buddha and the Tanka as the central figure, and then you have these 2 little monks on either side. Anyway, Shariputra, the story is that he did cultivate bodhicitta. He was led to enter into the Mahayana path, and he had that mind, but he was still a fairly new bodhisattva. And when you're in the beginning of the bodhisattva path, you can lose that Mahayana motivation. And the story is that he was walking along in the woods or something, and this sort of monster type of being appeared before him, a sort of demonic kind of being, and demanded that he give him his arm to eat. He wanted to partake of the Shariputra's arm. So Shariputra took his left arm and cut off his right arm, and took his left and then handed the right arm to this monster. And in Indian culture, handing somebody something with your left hand is verboten. You don't do that. Why? Because you actually use your left hand to wipe your bottom when you are finished with your business. So essentially he was using his unclean hand to offer his right arm to this monster, this demon. And so the demon got really upset and threw the arm to the side and said, "What are you doing? How dare you do that to me? Offer me something with your left hand." And Shariputra, seeing this being doing this, said, "With beings like this, there's no way I can fulfill my bodhisattva vow. I can't possibly enlighten beings when some of them are so ridiculous and hardened in the way that this being is." And so he lost his bodhisattva vow through the force of that. And it said he did go on to attain, even though that often acts as an obstacle to any spiritual realizations, he did attain the state of arhatship. But nonetheless, he degenerated from that more far-reaching motivation because he, kind of wasn't willing to deal with the realities of when we're helping others. It's not always working out the way we want it to, right? Sometimes we go to help somebody and we end up stepping in it and we make them more miserable than what we wanted to. We wanted to actually benefit them and make them feel good, but they feel lousy because of something we did the improper way or whatever the case might be. These things might seem insignificant to us, but to that other person, they're something that was really important. So we can't lose that joyous enthusiasm when we have had those sorts of experiences. Helping others is not easy, as we know in our world. It's not, that we have one size fits all kind of thing. You help this person that way, and then you can help the other one exactly the same way. You have to be very attentive to what is required and use your wisdom and your discernment to try to help others. But as Rinpoche says there, no matter how little progress we seem to make in helping them, we should never become discouraged. Now we go on to the 3 hindrances to joyous effort, which are really important to know. And this is once more all revolving around the term laziness. So the main obstruction, Geshe Loden says, to having our joyous effort is laziness. Laziness is defined as a mental factor. Again, just like joyous effort is a mental factor, this too is one of these 51 mental factors that are a way of looking at the contents of our minds. And this mental factor, having identified an object offering happiness, does not want to engage in virtue, or though wanting to, is weak in aspiration. So if we've identified the path, which all of us have, the path that leads to happiness for ourselves and others, engaging in virtue and so on, even though we've identified that as such, we don't want to engage in that virtue. Or even if we want to, we don't have a really strong aspiration. It becomes weak and lackluster, and we don't really get the results that we're ideally seeking because we don't have that enthusiasm. So laziness is one of the biggest obstacles that we have to deal with. I might mention that laziness is one of what we call the 20 secondary afflictions. When you go through the minds and mental factors, if you haven't done that, the first 6 are the root afflictions, the ones that are real problematic, and they include the 3 poisons of attachment, anger, and ignorance, and then also pride, doubt, and by that we mean an afflicted doubt, and wrong views, or I guess it's usually called afflicted views that are distorted ways of looking at things. But then in the 20 secondary afflictions, you always have them being rooted in the 3 poisons. They're an extension of those and different manifestations of those. And our laziness is often a manifestation of a variety of things. It can be a manifestation of our attachment. As we're going to see, one mode of laziness is where we're quite attached to our worldly affairs. And so we don't put effort into our spiritual practice. But another one is a level of ignorance where we aren't actually seeing the potential that we have to engage wholeheartedly. And we don't really put that effort into our path because we think we can't possibly achieve the results. So again, there can be different manifestations behind laziness. But let's take a look at the 3 types and get into that in more detail. First, though, we want to see the function of laziness. It causes joyous effort to decline. It prevents fresh virtue from being produced while allowing the virtue that we've already accumulated to degenerate. Laziness can become a big drain on our positive potential we've built and keeps us from generating new positive potential. Again, 3 types. The very first type we call the laziness of procrastination. This is kind of our mañana mentality that we have in New Mexico, right? Where we just keep putting things off and putting things off, even though we still have some intention to do them. We just think, well, but I don't have time today, or I don't have the energy today, or I'll do it tomorrow. And this becomes a big problem. And this is what we usually call laziness in our world, is people who just aren't willing to kind of get up off their butt and do the work. The laziness of attraction to meaningless activity is, as I was saying, is kind of rooted in an attachment to all of the things that we are involved in our day-to-day life that we think are so important. And we, in the process, neglect our spiritual practice. The laziness of inadequacy is where we mistakenly think that we can't possibly achieve what the Buddha sets out. We look at these perfections like we're going through in this course, and we think, well, maybe, Shakyamuni Buddha can do that, and Lama Tsongkhapa can do that, and all these great beings that we know of can do that. But me, no, I can't possibly do that. Well, of course you can do it. It just takes effort. So this type of laziness, they actually say this is one of the worst, because if we keep playing that tape in our heads, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this, well, then we never have any real draw towards the practice, because we think it's impossible for us to attain those accomplishments and realizations that are set out. So again, we have to be mindful of all three of these, maybe check up, do a little meditation over the next week to see which of these three is most problematic for you in terms of keeping you from wholehearted, joyous enthusiasm. So I'll start with some of the quotes that are from the, or the statements that are from the handout that you'll be getting. It says here, with the laziness of procrastination, you have a willingness to practice Dharma, but a sense that there's no time for it now. Again, I'll have to put it off till tomorrow. Sorry, too late, didn't get my practice done today. The remedy for procrastination is to reflect on impermanence, particularly that the time of death is uncertain. To overcome procrastination, you must realize that the greatest benefit to both yourself and others at all stages of your life will be gained from the practice of Dharma. So with that mindfulness that death could come at any moment, which of course goes back to an earlier teaching in the Lam Rim. Again, right now we're working with all of these teachings that are in the great scope, as it's sometimes called. Rinpoche calls this the path the path for the person of highest capacity, the highest capable being. And so this is the path that we're working with. But prior to that, way back on the beginning of the Lam Rim, when we looked at the path in common with the least capable being, we had the topic of impermanence and death. In fact, it's the first topic after we acknowledge this perfect human rebirth and how we have met with a spiritual guide. It's the first topic to wake us up to the reality that we have to use every minute of this life meaningfully. Why? Because it could end at any time. Recall that the death awareness meditation has three main points. First, to really get that death is certain without a doubt. Even though we all know this sort of intellectually, has that really hit home? Have we really faced our own mortality? Secondly, is this point about the time of death being uncertain. And we see people who, especially over the past, year and a half, almost 2 years now with the pandemic, right? Many people who were really very healthy. Remember that one Broadway performer who had all this amazing, vitality, and he was in like his 30s or low 40s, somewhere in that. Not an age that you expect people to succumb to an illness like this. And he battled it for months and ended up dying from it. Well, again, there are no guarantees. Death can come for any one of us at any particular time. In fact, I had a friend from college who's same age as me. She was coming up on her 63rd birthday, and she died a couple of weeks before it. And I don't really know what happened. They suspected that it was a stroke of some sort. But, she seemed relatively healthy. I don't know. I mean, things happen. So we really have to get that point. Why? Because we otherwise think, well, death is certain, but it's way out there in the future. And even as we keep getting closer and closer to it, we still keep thinking it's way out there. Well, death's kind of walking alongside of us at all times, and we never know when it's going to actually happen, when we're going to have our life taken from us. And of course, the third point in the death awareness meditation is to recognize what's most valuable at the time of death, which is our spiritual practice, not all the things we've accumulated or the friends that we have, or even what we've done to nurture and take care of this body. All of these things are meaningless in the face of death and going on to our next life. But what goes with you, of course, is your spiritual practice. So if we really reflect on this, this will help us to overcome that first laziness. And I know that's a hard thing to do. It's a bit like, oh God, I was feeling kind of, lazy to begin with, and now you want me to meditate on this topic that's just like so sobering and so depressing, that death could come at any time. Well, I think we also have to bring once more that joy into it and recognize, as what Rinpoche said in the second part of this. So let me pull that back up on the screen. To overcome procrastination, you must also realize this, that the greatest benefit to both yourselves and others throughout your entire life will be gained from the practice of Dharma. So why are we shortchanging our, Dharma practice? Why are we not putting the time and effort into it? And why we keep putting it off day after day after day? If this is really what's going to bring about the greatest benefit, we should be rolling up our sleeves and be joyfully doing whatever we can to do our practices, to read the Dharma, meditate on the Dharma, study the Dharma. Okay. Reflecting well on impermanence and death, Rinpoche says, gives us the perseverance we need to withstand any hardship we encounter without fear. Because this is the idea, again, that if we just have that awareness, we will stand up against whatever problems and difficulties and hardships we have in our practice of the Dharma, because they certainly can be there, without a doubt. While we cling to samsara, we fear so many things. But when we deeply understand the impermanence of all things, including our own life, we can overcome the cycle of death and rebirth. So again, just continuing advice on the importance of bringing an awareness of impermanence into it, and moreover, the idea that we want to do whatever we can with the time that we have to create the causes for happiness. And he says, rather than the sort of perseverance that makes us pursue what is meaningless, here, with the courage gained from the reflection on impermanence and death, we have the power and determination to overcome our delusions and only do what is meaningful in our life, which of course we will benefit from without a doubt if we put wholehearted effort into combating our delusions and meditating on those things that will progress our path to enlightenment. Well, I think this is the best thing we can do for ourselves as well as for all beings. The second is called the laziness of attraction to meaningless activity. And this is how it's described on your sheet. This form of laziness is being attracted or even attached to the activities of psychic existence motivated by a mind of non-virtue. Again, this mind of attachment, desire. I sometimes call this a laziness of busyness because we do have in the West certainly very busy lives, right? We can always fill a day without a doubt. It is interesting, even over the Thanksgiving holiday, I had a few days where I didn't really plan much of doing anything, but I found that it's easy to go down that slope, and all of a sudden you're just like not, you want to have something to do, and so you end up doing mundane things sometimes, and you go, well, what is that all about? There's some attraction to those things at times that we still do have to combat as we proceed on the path. It's better to have a life, at least I'm finding, where it's structured and I've got my Dharma study to do so I can teach and do all the things that I do. That's why it is important. I still kept up with my practice, but nonetheless, to have some measure of structured practice that you fit into your day, that you're going to do every day, regardless of what other activities you have. Otherwise, all that busyness of everything else that we do will encroach upon that time. And instead, we won't do our practice, or we won't have additional energy for the Dharma because we've put all of our energy into these mundane activities. The remedy for overcoming the laziness of attraction to meaningless activities is to reflect on the disadvantages of negative karma, which is what we're generally creating when we have the mind of attachment towards all of those. And then he says also to focus on developing bodhicitta and other positive motivating factors such as love, compassion, generosity, and wisdom. In fact, the advice I'm going to share towards the end of tonight from Lama Yeshe is really very sweet in giving us a way to, even if we have that busy lifestyle and a lot of meaningless activities, so-called meaningless activities, we can make them more meaningful with bodhicitta. But anyway, he gives us some good advice about how to work with that kind of exhaustion we might have from our daily life, doing the other things that we do to survive and support this body and what have you. Rinpoche says we have energy for whatever we have an interest in. We have no problem working hard at things such as planning our holiday because they are important to us. We look at the amount of energy people do put into all the things that bring them pleasure. And a lot of people get totally consumed by their work because their work brings about a lot of money, and that money allows them to do more things and to have more toys and to do all the various, attractions of samsara, all the various places to go and houses to have and boats to sail on or whatever they do. All of that becomes very attractive, and they put great energy into it. But that's a choice that you're making. Whether you want to put your energy into something that really just leads to more attachment, more desire, more problems, more difficulty, or put your energy into something that brings about a real solution to our problems. Whatever we have an interest in is going to take up our energy. Whether we have time for practice to do meditation or recite prayers is a question of interest, of how important we feel the Dharma is, how much we want to help other sentient beings, how much we understand about impermanence and death, the suffering of the lower realms, and so forth. So all the topics of the Lam Rim also do feed into this. If we see how important the Dharma is to us, well, then we gain greater interest in it, and it becomes our main motivation. It's the first thing we go to, rather than those mundane activities. So one thing I want to share before we go into this is I often say this when I'm talking to people about their practices, rather than trying to structure your practice into your day, kind of structure your day around your practice. Make sure that your practice is the main container, and then you do other things within that idea, because practice is really not just the time you spend on a cushion reciting a sadhana, or reciting various prayers or meditating or whatever. Practice is what we do 24/7. It's like how we are living in the world, how we are motivated to go about whatever actions we engage in. That's why Lama Zopa Rinpoche emphasizes this idea of bodhicitta mindfulness, which is a bit of what Lama Yeshe is going to talk about in that quote that I'm going to share later in this class. But essentially, if we have bodhicitta motivation for everything we do, if that's the container in which all of our activities are manifesting, well, then we're creating virtue all the time. That's why, as I was saying, these busyness that we do have in our lives can be transformed into virtue if we are holding it in that container of our spiritual practice. And of course, creating the proper time to keep that going and support all of that, so that we continue to further our meditation and our other practices. Because by all means, those are very important. If our life begins to overtake all of that and we become too involved in the meaningless affairs of this life, then of course we're not going to be putting the energy into our spiritual practice. But as I said, if we do those activities with bodhicitta motivation, they can be transformed to a large extent into the path to enlightenment. So I may share a little story on that later that I have shared before. But the laziness of inadequacy, this is the third one that, as I said, is thinking we can't do it. Delusions of incapacity make up this third type of laziness. It is believing that you are not capable of attaining enlightenment or engaging in the practices that lead to enlightenment. Somehow we're different. We're the one that broke the mold. We're the one that can't possibly be a Buddha or attain calm abiding, or engage in preliminary practices or whatever it is that we think is something that we would ideally need to do or like to do. The remedy for this type of laziness is that you must gird your mind with strong and positive views and eliminate all limiting misconceptions. Like you, all the Buddhas of the past were once deluded, but were able to apply effort and subsequently attain their goal. Since you too have Buddha nature, you can do the same. So this is why I meditated, had you meditate on Buddha nature at the beginning of tonight, was to really get that idea that each of us has this potential to attain enlightenment. We're this completely pure, clear mind that is simply polluted right now with things that are causing us to have pain and suffering and difficulty and this unenlightened existence. But the container that all of that is in is fundamentally pure. And if we understand that, and all we have to do then is put the effort into removing all of that, reducing it over time, and eventually eliminating it, then that Buddha nature manifests into our Buddhahood. Buddha nature technically consists of two elements. One is this developmental Buddha nature, which is the mind that can go through this process of purification and enhancing all the positive qualities that eventually leads to Buddhahood. The second one is the emptiness of the mind. And we're going to talk about emptiness more in the final class in this series when we look at the perfection of wisdom. But the emptiness of the mind means that the mind isn't inherently existent, meaning that there is nothing inherently abiding within the mind. All of those delusions and afflictions and obscurations and everything, as I said in the meditation, they're adventitious. They're there only because we haven't created the opposing force. This is pointing to the deeper nature of our minds. If our minds are empty of inherent existence, then there is a potential for transformation. We're not set in this unenlightened state or in our inability to attain, calm abiding or whatever spiritual goal we set for ourselves. All of that can be changed. Why? Because the mind is empty of inherent existence, because it isn't stuck in some sort of mode of being. Instead, it is subject to change. It is an a dependent phenomenon, not an independent phenomenon. So we'll talk more about that whole idea of emptiness when we get to the perfection of wisdom. But understanding Buddha nature at both of those levels, that conventionally our mind can be developed from this polluted state all the way to a completely purified state, and that is rooted in the ultimate nature of the mind, the emptiness of the mind. Because without emptiness, the mind would be stuck wherever it is. With emptiness, it can be totally transformed. So as Rinpoche says, you too have Buddha nature, so you can do the same. And reflecting that all the Buddhas who are enlightened right now, they, all of them of the past, all of them of the future, they all were equally deluded. Don't think that your mind is some sort of special mind that's incredibly deluded and will never be free of that. The Buddhas are evidence to the contrary. Of course, it is difficult to change bad habits, Rinpoche says. Our entire life, and for countless lives before, we have been under the control of attachment. We cannot expect that to drastically change in a few weeks or months or even years. I mean, I think this is something we have to remind ourselves of too when we're dealing with this form of laziness. I think often we have too high of an expectation. We think, oh, I've been practicing the Dharma for, 10 years, 5 years, 20 years, 50 years, if you get up to 50 years of practice. But really, that's a very small amount of time in many ways. I mean, when you compare it to beginningless lifetimes that we've been familiar with the opposing minds, we have to be very kind to ourselves and not expect that we're going to have this immediate turnaround. Somehow we're going to be able to become enlightened that quickly. I think this is one of the dangers of the Tantric Path. The Tantric Path is wonderful, and the Buddha taught it for a reason, for those beings who do have this extraordinary, unbearable compassion that cannot stand the thought that others are suffering because oneself is not yet enlightened and able to help them to a greater degree. But that, path is for those people who have that amazing courage. And many people enter the Tantric Path before they've even generated a real deep sense of bodhicitta. So they expect something out of the Tantric Path that is not what it can offer because we don't yet have our minds in the proper place to be able to engage in that practice wholeheartedly. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. Just means we have to have that understanding. Everything takes time. I think we've also been misled to some degree, and I'm not putting other traditions down by any means by saying this, but I think this has infiltrated our minds to some degree, the idea of sort of a spontaneous enlightenment, that somehow you can just be sitting there and then satori occurs or whatever. You have this magical awakening that totally transforms your being. Well, if some being does manifest that, it doesn't mean that they were able to do that just through that life. No doubt they did lots of work in prior lives that led them to that culmination of that transformation that occurs then. Everything takes time. You can't expect these immediate results. So when we get discouraged, when we have that laziness that thinks that I can't do it, or somehow I'm a different case, I'm a hard case, then we have to recall that actually we can, but it just takes time. It just is a matter of putting our nose to the grindstone, as they say, and continuing to do the work. We should therefore not feel discouraged when we fail to see any progress after some time. Such discouragement could make us give up. We might think that the Dharma doesn't work and return to our old life and our old problems, like there's some fault with the Dharma. The fault isn't with the Dharma, hate to say it, but the fault's with our own minds. We can only purify our negativities and create merit little by little, drop by drop. When we see this, we can develop the determination to persevere no matter how hard it is. Then, whether we are up or down, whether we've seen like our progress really move forward in astounding ways, but then also when we're down, when we feel like, oh my God, I took 5 steps backwards, we still see the importance of perseverance. We see that it doesn't matter in the moment. It's about the determination to continue to keep moving in that direction, regardless of what happens, regardless of what attainments we don't get or do get. Let's go looking at the 4 forces, which once more are also on your handout that you'll be getting. These 4 forces are really, as I said, quite important for us to utilize and to be aware of, because these are what help you to overcome that laziness, and also all 3 types of laziness, as well as to generate that joyous enthusiasm. So this is a very brief presentation of them by Geshe Loden, where he talks about each of these 4 in a very, very brief way. He says, to build your capacity for joyous effort, you need to be skillful. First, begin by developing a strong aspiration. In fact, aspiration is where everything starts. Why do we put any effort into anything? Because we aspire to attain that. This happens in worldly terms as well, right? When you have somebody who has become convinced that they want to become a millionaire, billionaire, whatever, then they seek the means to accomplish that and dedicate themselves to studying in college, university, going on to graduate studies, finding jobs that challenge them and bring them to this apex of their learning and their acquiring money and whatever it is that they're seeking. Even in worldly terms, we see that aspiration is important. If you don't aspire for something, you don't put any effort into it at all. If you think, oh, that's not so important to me, well, then you're not going to put effort into it. So this one is kind of obvious, but nonetheless, something that we can put more energy into developing, as we're going to see. Secondly, we have to then build our confidence by working in stages and building success on top of success. This is what's often called steadfastness. We just keep doing the work. We aspire to achieve the goal, to move in that direction. We then just keep doing the work bit by bit, accomplishing this, accomplishing that, moving on, always feeling like we're kind of accumulating one thing after another to build that continued confidence that we can get there, that we can do it. Then develop a sense of joy at your success and practice so that enjoyment isn't crushed by too much intensity. We can get really intense in our practice. Some people I've seen, practitioners do this, where it almost is, it's a drain to watch them, because they should be more joyful. In fact, I had one teacher that said, if you're practicing the Dharma, studying the Dharma, and it's not fun, well, then you're doing it the wrong way. This idea of joy, as I pointed out earlier, is so crucial for this effort or enthusiasm. It's not about thinking that this is some huge burden that we're bearing. It's rather that we should be so joyful, delighted to be engaging in all of this. This is something we do have to work at. As you're going to see, they compare it to the joy that children have when they're at play. I'm sure we've all seen that, right? When children are just like doing things with toys. And my brother was amazing. He used to play by himself. He was 6 years younger than me, so we would sometimes do things, but he just was, a lot younger at certain times. And he would be downstairs in the basement, and he was really into baseball. And he would like have this whole baseball game in his head and be throwing the ball against the wall, and it would bounce up and he'd catch it and whatever. I mean, he'd be down there for hours playing by himself and just be so delighted at it, right? We know that kids have that ability to just become totally immersed in what they're doing with such a light spirit. what happens to us, sometimes is we get a little too solemn around our practice, and we feel kind of like it's a burden, and we just engage in it because we feel we have to. Well, you should have a much more joyful attitude. And then finally, the fourth power or force: when you are tired and not before, take a rest. This is what's often called relinquishment, the idea that we have to let go of our intense practice and doing what we can at times to replenish our resources, to take a rest. Relax, he says, so that you can rejoin your practice fresh and enthusiastic again. So even the Buddhist path does have some acknowledgement that this isn't a marathon that we're running, I'm sorry, a sprint that we're running. This is a marathon. You have to kind of move along and at times take it a little bit slower and then speed up and whatever, so we do have to, kind of do what we can to take care of ourselves on our path. So let's look at these in more detail. The power of aspiration. This is on the handout that you have. As it is said, or that you'll be getting, as it is said that yearning acts, that's the term he chose for aspiration. Yearning acts as the basis for joyous perseverance. Aspiration here refers to yearning. The way to develop aspiration is to meditate on how pleasant and unpleasant effects arise from virtuous and non-virtuous karma, respectively. So we see that most of our aspiration is rooted in a fundamental understanding of the law of cause and effect, that the results that we get are in line with the causes we create. So if we want to experience the bliss of Buddhahood and all of the things that go on the path to enlightenment that are attainments that we can accomplish, that are all part of our own happiness and the happiness of others, then we have to invest in those causes. We have to aspire to achieve that. Faith acts as a basis for yearning. So when one has the faith of conviction in those two types of karma, both virtuous and non-virtuous, and their respective results, one will consequently aspire to eliminate non-virtuous karma and to adopt virtuous karma. So faith is always said to be the precursor to aspiration. In fact, when we go into concentration next time, we're going to talk about how faith, aspiration, effort, and then eventually this factor we call pliancy are all the antidotes to laziness in terms of our engaging in meditation, developing more stability in our meditation. So where does our aspiration come from? It comes from faith. Faith in the teachings of the Buddha, particularly around karma, and the conviction that if we follow the law of karma, the results will ensue, without a doubt. Whether you believe in it or not, if you follow what the Buddha says in terms of engaging in virtue, the results of happiness will follow. This is how it all works, just in the same way that things work in our physical world in terms of causes and conditions and the results that come from them. The second one is the power of steadfastness. Developing the power of steadfastness means that you bring to conclusion, without turning back, anything at which you joyously persevere. You kind of keep doing the work to get to the conclusion of this, to do my 100,000 prostrations, to accomplish the generation stage in Tantra, or whatever it is that you are, your next step, your next thing that you need to meditate on and work on. Then he says, do not try to do everything initially. First examine the situation carefully. And if you see that you can do it, you then engage in it. Whereas if you aren't yet able to do it, you don't engage in it. This is some wisdom behind it. I see this, maybe not horribly frequently, but certainly in my days as a teacher, I've seen a lot of people come in and feel very enthusiastic about wanting to tackle the whole thing all in one big bite, right? And this Tibetan Buddhist path, as we know from our study and practice, is immense. It's incredible how much is involved in it. And you can't possibly bite off the whole thing and chew it, and digest it. It doesn't work that way. You have to first examine, well, what am I capable of doing right now? Where is my own capacity? It's interesting that this is how Rinpoche refers to these three scopes of the Lam Rim. Where is our own capacity? How capable am I? Right now, I might be only capable of looking at my future existence and doing what I can to affect that. And then I have to build up more capability to be able to look at the middle scope and wanting to be free from samsara. And then eventually the great scope, the person of greatest, highest capacity, who is intent upon achieving Buddhahood. But I think we often come in, and I myself admit to this fault of having come into Tibetan Buddhism with the anticipation of practicing bodhicitta and becoming very compassionate, loving, and kind, and doing all these amazing things to develop that side of me. But I just wanted to skip right over, all of the lower teachings, not look at my own suffering, my own situation, my own development of renunciation, and so on. So we have to once more kind of be very wise about how we approach this. What am I capable of? What is my real capacity right now? Can I do this task? And if I think I can, on the basis of my capacity right now, and not because I can't do it further down the road, it's based on where you are right now, then you commit to doing it. And you make that steadfast effort that's going to get you to the conclusion of that. It's going to bring you to that level of understanding, practice, realization, whatever. He says, once you do commit to doing it, though, then you must not leave it unfinished, but follow through to completion of the task. I think it's interesting, even in worldly terms, we often see this, right? Some people develop this habit of like never finishing anything. They go, oh, here's a painting that I started back, 5 years ago, but I never got around to completing it. And here's some work I did on the bedroom here, but I never really got around to completing it. And, whatever. They have all these pieces of their lives that are unfinished. It's a very bad habit to get into because you never see the completion of something. Take it to its final point, to the period at the end of the sentence, and then go on to the next sentence, then go on to what comes next. I think it's, again, something that we can see even in worldly terms as a valuable skill to have, steadfastness. Power of joy means that when you first engage in an activity, you do it joyfully. And once you have commenced it, you have a sense of being insatiable, in that you do not want to discontinue the activity. Don't need to say a lot about that, but here's that idea. It is said that one should generate an attitude similar to children who engage in play without being satiated. Just delighted to continue our Dharma practice. Somebody says, oh, we're going to do this, practice together. You're like, oh, good. This sounds so wonderful. You just are so joyful, so happy to hear at the opportunity to practice yourself or with others. Power of relinquishment. If you become physically or mentally fatigued from your effort, you must rest for a while. Otherwise, you will become exhausted and very disheartened, thereby later preventing your joyous perseverance. We do see this in worldly terms too, right? Some people, don't take care of themselves as they are trying to pursue a master's degree or whatever it is that they are doing in worldly terms, and they end up not having that same sort of enthusiasm again because they didn't really nurture what needed to be taken care of in regard to their own energy. There are times where we need to set the practice aside. The one story I was going to share, which again I have shared before, some of you may have heard this, was actually at a retreat that some of you may have been at as well with Venerable Rabina at the Immaculate Heart of Mary Center here in Santa Fe. And now, unfortunately, it's been sold, so it's not in business anymore. But anyway, at this retreat, we were talking about the perfections. Venerable Rabina was talking about them, and I mentioned this whole idea with joyous effort of relinquishment, setting things aside. And I said to her, it's kind of a slippery slope at times. And I said, for example, I've been in this retreat with you all weekend, and at that time, Downton Abbey was on Masterpiece Theater on Sunday nights, and so we're on our Sunday afternoon, concluding a weekend of intense teaching and practice with her. And I said, all I feel like doing right now is going home and turning on Downton Abbey and just chilling out for the evening. And she said to me, she goes, well, Don, if you're going to watch Downton Abbey, you're either going to watch it with bodhicitta or you aren't going to watch it at all. And she was getting at that whole idea that, again, even when we relinquish things, even when we take care of ourselves by resting, by going to the hot tubs or whatever it is that you need to do to kind of bring yourself back into that place where you're going to go full steam ahead, you do it with bodhicitta. You don't do it with attachment. Why? Because attachment's going to end up becoming that second type of laziness, right? Where you're just attracted to worldly affairs, to things that you think become more important than your Dharma practice, than your study and meditation and so on. So anyway, I thought I would share that story. So I did my best to watch Downton Abbey that night with bodhicitta, but it's hard sometimes, Immediately after you have rested, make effort again. And when you have completely finished your earlier activity, do not let this satisfy you, but rather you should persevere at other higher activities. So we see that we just keep coming back to the work. And if we need to relinquish it for a while and restore our energy, but we keep moving on and taking on the next task, the next higher thing that we need to do. Ways to practice this perfection. Here's the conclusion to all of this. I'm going to share a little advice from Lama Zopa and from Lama Yeshe. Know that once more, there are also those same ways to practice with the various qualities and the incorporating the other perfections into that are on the sheet that you're going to get, that handout. I won't go into those, but I thought this advice was so precious that I felt like it was important to share it. First, from Lama Zopa, from his book that I've been quoting quite a bit tonight. We need an extensive mind, one that sustains the determination to achieve what we wish, no matter what obstacle we encounter, be it illness, heat, cold, whatever. We cannot succeed with a weak mind. And he goes on to say, just as Milarepa bore great hardships to gain realizations, living an austere life and eating only nettles, we need continued strong practice. Now, again, because we read that and we hear this model of Milarepa, it doesn't mean that this is what we all are going to have to do or what we all have to, endure. But we have to be ready to endure all of that. We have to have an enthusiasm that isn't going to get watered down, diminished by these various things that happen in our lives. I mean, I've even heard that from some people. They say, well, why is this all happening to me? I've been practicing the Dharma for so long, and it's like, there are no guarantees with this. And this is not about, oh, I start practicing the Dharma and then I never have to suffer again. I'll never have to endure any hardships. In fact, it might be the opposite, that the more that we wholeheartedly practice, the more obstacles we end up facing, because all of that stuff kind of ripens into our life and provides us with the opportunity to extend ourselves. But we have to have that understanding that we're sort of, again, in it for the long term and in it for doing what we can to continue to endure whatever hardships we have to experience. Realizations will not happen, he says, until we have overcome obstacles. We must have the determination to face them and destroy them. There are said to be 3 attitudes needed when meditating on the Lam Rim, doing this type of intensive practice that we do in our tradition. First, generating a long view, then generating an extensive thought, as well as being relaxed. Okay, so let's look at how he describes each of these, and I'll talk about them a little. Always having a long view means always having the motivation to achieve enlightenment. I'll share another story here, which actually has His Holiness talking about Milarepa. This was something I think I've shared with some of you before as well, but when I was at teachings with His Holiness in at the UCLA, I can't remember if it was arena, auditorium, or what have you, but it was teachings on the Precious Garland by Nagarjuna. And one of the questions that His Holiness got from an audience member was, what is the quickest path to enlightenment? Like, how do I get there as quickly as possible? And what's the shortcut? And His Holiness started answering in Tibetan. Then all of a sudden, he started weeping, and his head sort of lowered. And you could hear a pin drop in this place. I mean, everybody was so focused on, wow, what is going on with His Holiness here? And he sort of came out of that, and he started talking to Thupten Jinpa in Tibetan and giving him, some of what he had was thinking about. And he related this story of Milarepa. Milarepa had these disciples, and it was coming to the end of Milarepa's life, and he knew that, his disciples knew that, and he told his disciples to be sure to come the next morning for a very important teaching. And they were all thinking like this questioner, like, oh, he's going to give us the secret stuff. He's going to give us the real way to get out of here as quickly as possible, as easily as possible, what have you. And they all show up the next morning very eager, and Milarepa simply stands up. He turns around, lifts up his robe to show the calluses on his butt where he sat for years on rocks and what have you to meditate. And that's the lesson. The lesson is that it takes a lot of hard work to attain this. And His Holiness then switched to English. He says, don't think easiest, quickest path. Always have long-term view. Always have that view that you're going to stay in it as long as it takes. That's what I think we're talking about here, is if you have that attitude, then you don't get discouraged when things come up, and you keep your perseverance because you think, well, this is what I have to face. This is what's going on. I just keep plowing ahead. I just keep doing what needs to be done to take another step, to move in that direction. The second is having an extensive thought. This means determining to progress through the graduated paths of the three capable beings in order to do that. By extensive, he means you have to include the entire path. The path to enlightenment, the Lam Rim, isn't where, oh, these meditations matter and these don't. The whole thing matters. We have to have an extensive thought that embraces the entirety of the Lam Rim, that sees it all as personal instruction for each of us as to how we need to engage in the Dharma. Then finally, this wonderful last one. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, he's got a little more on that one. Even though the body of our actual practice is bodhicitta, the graduated path of the higher capable being, we need to encompass the other two paths as well, of the middle capable being and the lesser capable being, never forgetting the preliminary meditations that will enable us to attain bodhicitta. So just pointing out again that the entire Lam Rim is there for a purpose. It's all personal instruction. We need the extensive thought that no matter how long it takes, we will persevere until we succeed. We will, engage in all the teachings that Buddha gave, all of the various things, and not neglect any of them. The third attitude, maybe we like hearing this one, is having a relaxed mind. That sounds so nice, right? It's important not to squeeze our mind, Rinpoche says. That is, to hold it tight for a few weeks and then, unable to sustain that, completely lose our meditation. I see this in practitioners often too. There was one person who came to Thupten Narvuling here, and he bought all of these books on his first visit to the center. It was like he had all of these things he was going to engage in, and I never saw him again. I don't know, maybe he's a Buddha by now. I don't know. But my impression was that he was like, having this tight mind that was just like looking at it, oh, this is what I need to engage in. And then when you start having that mind, it all seems like too much. You need a more relaxed mind that's going to approach the Dharma in that relaxed way. In fact, the very first teaching that my teacher Geshe Jampa Gyatso gave in Italy at the beginning of our 7 years of the master's program, he said this. He says, it's so important. He says, some of you are going to experience physical difficulties. Some of you are going to experience mental difficulties. Some of you are going to experience financial difficulties, down the whole list of all the things that we might have to face. He says, but it's really important that you just keep persevering and that you relax. He used to use the Italian, he used to say, rilassati, rilassati. And he means to kind of have a relaxed mind. He doesn't mean like go check out, for 2 years and just vegetate. He means keep a relaxed mind. That will keep you engaging in the Dharma without squeezing yourself, as Rinpoche says, getting that kind of tight mind. In fact, they say that some of that tightness of mind can even manifest in the body as lung. You might have heard of lung. It's a wind disorder that can manifest for meditators who are meditating too strongly, too tightly, even studying too tightly. I had a little bout of this in my studies at the master's program, where I think I was just too, tunnel vision kind of thing. And you need to sort of back out of that, or else you just plummet down into this unserviceable state. So anyway, thought I would share a little bit on that. After that, because nothing has happened, after putting all this intense energy in, for some people, there's no energy to continue. Then we are completely relaxed, which is not the meaning of this third attitude. If you just completely fall apart after you try to put some energy into it, but you get really discouraged. Rather than a short, too intense time of meditation that is followed by collapse, with the mind slack and unable to focus at all, we should maintain a relaxed balance, neither too tight nor too loose. Remember that idea of the middle way. In that way, we can sustain our practice. Now from Lama Yeshe to conclude, I won't say maybe too much about this because it's just very sweet as it is. He says, if you take a proper look deep into your heart, you will see that one of the main causes of your dissatisfaction is the fact that you are not helping others as best you can. When you realize this, you'll be able to say to yourself, I must develop myself so I can help others satisfactorily. By improving myself, I can definitely help. Thus, you have more strength and energy to meditate, to keep pure morality and do other good things. You have energy because I want to help others. That is why Lama Tsongkhapa said that bodhicitta is the foundation of all realizations. Do you recall the story of Shanti Deva and how people used to put him down? They used to call him Dushe Sumpa, 3 discriminations, which means one who knows how to do only 3 things: eating, sleeping, and excreting. That was all they saw him doing. This was a very bad thing to call someone, especially a monk, but that's all people could see him doing. However, he had bodhicitta, so whatever he did, even ordinary things, was of greatest benefit to others. Lying down peacefully, he would meditate with great concern for the welfare of all living beings, and many times out of compassion, he would cry for them. Westerners need that kind of practice. Fundamentally, we are lazy. Well, maybe not lazy, but when we finish work, we are tired and don't have much energy left. So when you come home from work, lie down comfortably and meditate on bodhicitta. This is most worthwhile, much better than rushing in speedily, throwing down a coffee and dropping onto your meditation cushion to try to meditate. It doesn't work that way. Your nervous system needs time and space. You can't be rushing through traffic 1 minute and sitting quietly meditating the next. Everything takes time and space. It is much better to have a quiet, blissful cup of coffee, and don't pressure yourself either. That too is very bad. Don't punish yourself when you are too tired to meditate. I should be meditating. I am very bad. You destroy yourself like this. Be wise. Treat yourself, your mind, sympathetically with loving kindness. If you are gentle with yourself, you will become gentle with others, so don't push. Pushing doesn't work for me. That's why I tell others not to force themselves. We are dealing with the mind, not rocks and concrete. It is something organic. Anyway, I love that quote from Lama Yeshe. That's from the Perfection of Bodhicitta, one of the last teachings he gave at Kopan prior to his passing away in 1984. So wasn't there, didn't have that good fortune. I don't know if any of you were there, but any questions from tonight? I hope that those two masters giving us those precious bits of advice helps you to see ways to kind of take all of those words I said tonight and make them into something that's a bit more from the heart, the sorts of things that we need to have this joyous enthusiasm. Anybody? Yeah, Mary, please.
Don, thank you. This teaching has just been really inspirational for where I'm at this week. And
Good.
I wrote down what you said at the beginning, to structure the day around the practice. That is really, really helpful.
Good.
So thank you.
Good. Yeah, I do feel like we sometimes do it backwards. We say, well, I've got my whole day already planned. I need to structure the Dharma to fit in there. I mean, I even used to do this one teaching that was all about a concept that I think his name is Steve. I'm missing his last name right now, but he talked about how we compartmentalize our life even to some degree, and we think, oh, there's my work life, and there's my social life, and there's my, spiritual life. And he says you need to have a more integrated life where everything is your spiritual life. It's kind of, that's the container, and you do everything within the context of that, and that's what's most important, is to keep that structure. Stephen Covey, is it Covey? No, it starts with a P. Pavlika, I don't know. Anyway, if I can find it, I'll include it with the materials, and you can take a look at the article. But the idea is that if we have a more I can't think of the right word right now, but if we have this more integrated approach to our lives, where our spiritual path becomes the container that everything is residing within, then we have success with that, most importantly, and everything else kind of fits and interlocks in a very beautiful way. So we don't have this life that feels all disjointed. And anyway, sorry, I wasn't quite ready to talk about that tonight. So Pavlova, I can't remember the name. Sorry, it's something in there. But anyone else, anything you'd like to share or questions that you might have? I know one thing I'm always reminding people, and especially with this topic, is that I've already alluded to it earlier, is that there's so many things to practice in Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism in particular. It is really important that we just have this very measured way of going about things and try to do the best that we can with what we have on our plate. And then again, keep moving forward, keep adding on additional things and what have you. Don't let this be discouraging to you. I know that it can seem quite overwhelming. I had one friend who hadn't really studied Buddhism to a great degree, but he passed away from AIDS in San Francisco. And he had been practicing a bit, and he told me towards the end of his life, he said, I've decided the Buddhist path is just too hard. I'm going to go practice with some Christian traditions for a while. And so he ended up spending his last months, years, with the Metropolitan Community Church in San Francisco, which is more gay oriented and what have you, but he felt very welcome there. But the idea that somebody would make that decision and kind of look at it and go, well, and it's just a little too hard for me. I think I'll choose something that's a little bit easier. I mean, maybe when you're already facing death in that way, it might be a relief to some degree to not feel all of that. But that's when the Dharma should be most important to us. And we know that that's what will keep us moving forward and getting through whatever obstacles, even our own death, our losing of this life and the vitality and the things that we have. All of that should be of some value. So there's an immense diversity to what we study in Buddhism, but it's all really quite useful. And we don't have to digest it all in one swallow. Take your time, keep going through bit by bit, and gradually it all falls into place. The one thing I might also say is another encouragement in working with the Lam Rim in particular is know that anytime you work on one particular piece, it does have an effect on other pieces of the Lam Rim and your own understanding of them, because you begin to see the interconnection between all of it, that it's not just like this step and then this step and they're all totally separate. They're all part of a overall process of spiritual development. So keep that in mind as well, and work on what you can. All right. Let's do our dedication prayers then. Again, if any of you do have any questions later on, feel free to write to me or bring them up next week, and I'll be happy to address them. Let's do our concluding prayers, our dedication prayers, and maybe can bring some real joy into this as you recite these words, just thinking how wonderful that we spent this last hour and a half looking at this topic and trying to encourage ourselves individually in wholehearted practice. And may all of what we've done become the cause for our own enlightenment and the enlightenment of all beings. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Another thing that can be very inspiring in developing joy is to think about all these joyous beings that we have in our lives, such as His Holiness and Lama Zopa, and think about their laugh, the way that they take things very lightly in the midst of their lives and what they've had to deal with. His Holiness has had to deal with a lot in leaving his home country and all of the things he's faced and endured, as has Rinpoche and Asalhita, Lama Yeshe's reincarnation. But these amazing guides are the source of joy for us and others. So we make strong prayers for these three guides, as well as all spiritual guides, to have good health, long lives, and for all their wishes to be fulfilled. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. And as usual, dedicate for all those beings that you're holding in your heart right now, whatever suffering they're experiencing, may it be alleviated immediately through the force of what we've done here tonight. And may they have all the causes that lead them on a path to perfect peace and happiness. And may all beings have these same results through what we've done here tonight. Thank you all so much for being here tonight and giving me the opportunity to talk about this topic, which again is a very important one and one that I think we all can benefit from and practice. So be well, spend some time if you can over the next week reflecting on this, and next week we'll go into the perfection of concentration. Thank you all. Be well.
Thank you, Don.
Oh, you're so welcome. I enjoy this time with you guys so much. So, okay. Be well. Bye, Laura.